There was a time when flying wasn't just travel, it was luxury. You dressed up for it. You were served champagne by smiling flight attendants in crisp uniforms, and at the center of it all was one name: Pan American World Airways, or simply Pan Am. Pan Am didn't just fly planes, they created modern air travel. They connected continents, invented the jet age, and defined what it meant to see the world. But behind the glamour and the blue globe logo, something was going wrong. Because while Pan Am built the skies, they forgot to build a future. And in less than 2 decades, the greatest airline the world had ever seen disappeared. Welcome to Missed Billions Explained, where we dive into the stories of empires that rose, ruled, and collapsed, and what their mistakes can still teach us today. If you enjoy stories of ambition, innovation, and arrogance, make sure to subscribe, because this one has everything: power, prestige, and a fall that reshaped an entire industry. This is the story of Pan Am, the airline that owned the skies and lost it all. Pan Am began in 1927 as a tiny mail service flying between Florida and Havana. But under one man, Juan Trippe, a bold and brilliant visionary, it grew into the most powerful airline in history. Trippe didn't just fly planes. He created modern air travel. They connected continents, invented the jet age, and defined what it meant to see the world. But behind the glamour and the blue globe logo, something was going wrong. Because while Pan Am built the skies, they forgot to build a future. And in less than 2 decades, the greatest airline the world had ever seen disappeared. Pan Am didn't follow the industry, it created it. They were the first to introduce international routes across oceans, use jet aircraft commercially, establish in-flight entertainment, train flight attendants as professionals. They built the world's first global airline network and introduced innovations that every other carrier copied. When the Boeing 707 launched in the late 1950s, it was Pan Am that took the risk, ordering 20 jets before they even existed. That bet paid off. The jet age was born, and Pan Am became its symbol. Their blue logo was instantly recognizable in every airport around the globe. Pan Am wasn't just flying people, they were flying dreams. By the 1960s, Pan Am was everywhere. Movies, posters, ads, the brand represented sophistication, freedom, and progress. Their stewardesses were celebrities, their pilots were heroes. They opened the world's first computerized reservation system. They even helped design the Boeing 747, the aircraft that would become the queen of the skies. But behind the success story, cracks were forming. Because Pan Am wasn't built like other airlines. They were a global empire without a domestic backbone. And that flaw would prove fatal. You see, while Pan Am ruled the international routes, they had no domestic network in the United States. Back then, government regulations divided the skies. Certain airlines handled domestic flights, others international. So when passengers wanted to fly from, say, Chicago to London, they'd fly a domestic carrier to New York and then Pan Am overseas. It worked at first, but when the US airline market was deregulated in 1978, everything changed. Suddenly, airlines like Delta, United, and American could expand internationally, and they already had domestic networks, loyalty programs, and cheaper operating costs. Pan Am, meanwhile, had high expenses, expensive aircraft, and no home base to feed passengers into its system. They were a global airline without roots, and when the storm came, they had nothing to hold on to. The 1970s were brutal for the airline industry. The oil crisis sent fuel prices skyrocketing, the global economy was slowing down, but Pan Am kept spending. They had just invested billions in the new Boeing 747, a massive gamble on long-distance luxury travel. When the oil shock hit, those giant planes became expensive to operate. Pan Am had too many seats, too few passengers, and too much pride to cut back. Meanwhile, the glamour of air travel was fading. Competition increased. Prices dropped. Air travel became accessible and less elegant. Pan Am tried to keep their luxury image, but the world was moving on. They were still selling romance when people wanted affordability. Pan Am realized too late that it needed a domestic network. So in 1980, they bought National Airlines for $437 million, a move meant to fix decades of imbalance. But it was a disaster. National's routes overlapped with Pan Am's existing ones. Their fleets were incompatible. Their cultures clashed. Instead of synergy, Pan Am got chaos. Debt piled up, maintenance costs exploded, and the merger drained the company's cash just as new competitors were flooding the skies. Then came the moment that shattered their reputation forever. In December 1988, Pan Am Flight 123 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, after a terrorist bomb detonated on board. All 259 people on the plane and 11 on the ground were killed. The tragedy devastated families and Pan Am's image. For a brand built on trust, safety, and prestige, it was the final blow. Passengers lost confidence, bookings collapsed, and the company's finances, already fragile, couldn't survive the impact. By the early 1990s, Pan Am was a shadow of its former self. They sold off routes, aircraft, and even their iconic Manhattan headquarters to stay afloat. But nothing worked. The company was drowning in debt and unable to compete with more efficient airlines. On December 4, 1991, after 64 years of flight, Pan Am ceased operations. The last flight from Bridgetown to Miami landed quietly. The airline that had built the modern world was gone. So what if Pan Am had adapted earlier? What if they'd focused less on glamour and more on efficiency, or built a domestic network when they still had time? They might have survived deregulation. They might have led the modern aviation era instead of dying at its dawn. They had everything: innovation, prestige, and history. But they couldn't change. And when the world shifted from luxury to accessibility, Pan Am stayed stuck in the clouds. Pan Am's story is more than corporate failure. It's the story of how every empire falls. They changed the world, but success blinded them. They believed they owned the skies forever. But innovation doesn't reward legacy, it rewards adaptability. Pan Am thought they were in the airline business, but they were really in the connection business. And the companies that understood that, like Delta, United, and eventually Emirates, inherited the world they created. Pan Am's name still means something. It means elegance, exploration, and the golden age of flight. It reminds us of when flying felt like a miracle, not a routine. But it also reminds us of what happens when you mistake past success for future security. Because every industry has its Pan Am, a company that builds the future and forgets to live in it. Thanks for watching Missed Billions Explained. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which empire you want us to explore next. Because somewhere, right now, another giant thinks it owns the skies, and history is already writing its descent.
The first passenger jet clipper to fly the Atlantic. Because of its greater size and speed, it will do the job of several of the biggest propeller-driven planes.